Hello there guys and welcome back to the channel. Now in today's video we are going to be talking about Kate Bishop. Now in my personal opinion, one of the more capable champions in the new featured 6-star hero crystal, but also arguably hardest one to use. Definitely requires some practice getting used to and very active and involved gameplay. However, I do think she has a ton of potential, ton of versatility, and we will see a lot of her going forward in the contest. So I'll do my best to explain her and kind of give you guys a decent guide on how to use her, but she is one of those champions where you will need to practice using her in order to get the best out of her. Right, so as always, let's break down the positives, negatives, some neutral things, and let's start with the positives. She does have high DPS. It is not the highest DPS in generic situations, but it's definitely well above average. And however, it is conditional because, well, we're going to explain that a bit later in the video, but there will be plenty of instances where she can have a ridiculous damage output, and there will be some times when her damage output actually dips, especially if you want to access some of her utility early on. Um, Moving on, she counters evade, miss, and has debuff suppression, basically white tranquilize, so that gives her quite a lot of utility, especially if you combine it with the fact that in majority of the fight she will be delivering most of the damage via passive damage over time cold snap, which cold snap is one of the more rare dot types in the game. Incinerate and shock and bleed and poison are all more frequent in my opinion. And on top of the fact it's passive, which means you can use it on debuff shruggers. It will not be shrugged off by a whole bunch of nodes, and it just bypasses a ton of things, which is absolutely awesome, which is one of the best things about Kate Bishop. And that is definitely something not to overlook. Another cool thing about Kate is that she does have that Elsa and Mr. Negative's, evade counter punish mechanic that lets you get guaranteed safe intercepts in order to trigger the nodes like ebb and flow intercept, so on and so forth. And it also gives you a passive stun, which then gives you an opportunity to land your heavy attacks easily. The fact that the stun is passive, again, will work against a ton of nodes, which is absolutely awesome. It is very cool mechanic. It's one of the best counter evades in the game because of that passive stun at the end, and it only has a 10-second cooldown. Passive stun for 3 seconds, it basically means it has like 7-second cooldown, and it means that it is going to be there much more often than for most other champions. On top of it, she does actually have AI manipulation, because whilst the opponents are in the corner, they are 60% more likely to throw a special attack, therefore making it quite easy to control the opponents. And again, cool thing it is passive, it is not a debuff, it is not something you need to kind of like maintain or activate in the fight. And therefore there are far fewer things that would counter it. It's also technically not taunt, even though it works like taunt. And that can have its positives for sure. And it is very useful because she does have this quite aggressive, demanding playstyle, which I will put in the negatives. Because there is a ton of timer watching with her, whether it be that how much time you have on your trick arrows, when your evade comes back on cooldown, and there's multiple different trick arrows. Then on top of it, there's also your tracking debuff that will often be present and you need to keep an eye out for. And then if there's any nodes or defender abilities that you need to keep an eye on, it is quite stressful and skill intensive to play her. She's not a champion where again you just build up to like level 1, level 2 done. You do need to be very, very clued in the fight. Additionally, she does have alternate costs, especially for shorter fights. Now, for longer fights, you can have it all. For Labyrinth of Legends, you can activate all of your trick arrows and, go and have fun. But for all of the shorter fights, she really does have alternate costs of versus you having the ability to access the damage or utility. Now, most of her arrows are kind of bad or, just nice to have. There's really the main choice often will be in between Tranquility, which will suppress opponents' debuffs, or your like Cold Snap, which is the damage arrow. And for shorter fights, like in battlegrounds and stuff like that, there is a massive difference how long the fight will take place if you start with anything except Cold Snap or when you start with Cold Snap. So there is this cost, kind of like with Black Widow Clairvoyant, where, if you want to do damage, you need to be in Incinerate phase, but if you want power control or if you want to heal, you need to basically abandon your damage and go for something else. Similar to Mysterio or Psycho Man or Jubilee or a bunch of other champions, and I have never been quite a big fan of that. But in this case, I kind of understand it fits with the character. It's just something you need to be aware of. Now, the best cool thing there is that your tracking is based on your heavy attack, so you can still always bypass miss, regardless whether you go for damage or not. And that the debuff that you have is Cold Snap, and Cold Snap inherently shuts down Evade. So even when you go for damage, you still have miss and Evade kind of like shut down abilities, which is awesome. And the last one is she does have demanding playstyle. As mentioned above, with that timer watching, with everything else, you need to make sure that you get opponents' special attacks out in time, that you refresh your freak arrow effects, and then on top of it all, that you always nail your perfect releases, which is very, very important for her, and again, highly affects her damage output or her utility potency, basically. So, there's quite a lot going on in the fight always, so she's not an easy champion to use, or definitely not a champion for beginners, I would say. Some neutral things. Her damage is extremely dependent on nodes and masteries to much higher degree than an average champion, and the explanation there is quite simple, because vast majority of her damage typically does come from that Cold Snap, and that Cold Snap effectively locks in your special attack damage for the rest of the fight. And that is like a massive, massive thing, and it always works in the background. So any attack modifiers, Kate is extremely sensitive for. So for instance, when we had the previous meta, the last meta, where we were getting weakness debuffs, you could feel that. She was significantly slower, even if she just had the one weakness, that Cold Snap and everything else does like less damage, and you could very, very much so feel it. On top of it, on the reverse side, if there is anything that modifies her attack in positive way, there is a massive, massive increase in damage, unlike with most other champions. It's kind of similar situation with Longshot, where if you run Liquid Courage Double Edge with Longshot, you can do some insane burst damage, because those incinerates scale with your boosts with your Liquid Courage Double Edge. They do that much more damage, and you can spam them, and there is night and day on how much damage you can put out with Longshot, with Suicide, and without. And it's similar with Kate. Now, unfortunately, just like Longshot, she has no way of dealing with recoil or poison or bleed at the start of the fight. So, really not recoil friendly, but she is extremely responsive to any attack modifiers, such as boosts, such as Liquid Courage Double Edge, such as any nodes that increase special attack damage. Top of it all, she does have aggressive playstyle, which does take getting used to, and again, as I mentioned, requires you to be consistently clued in. And also, just to point out, most of her stats are relatively average, slightly above average, which is not bad at all, but she does have second highest block proficiency in skill class and like 13th highest block proficiency in the game. It's actually very, very good, and surprised me, and I'm quite pleased with that. Right, moving on to the actual gameplay. First, let's explain her 4 trick arrows and the pre-fights. Now, number 1, you always want to use the pre-fight. You never want to leave it to randomly cycling through. It just makes fights much more difficult to manage, much more chaotic, and slower in the case. In almost every instance, you want to use Cold Snap pre-fight, activate 2 level 1s, get to a Cold Snap zone, and then shift to whichever arrow you want. In most fights, it probably will be Caltrops for some extra additional damage. But the name of the game is, start with the Cold Snap. So, it does have Cold Snap arrow, then Tranquilize arrow, which is very useful, because if you, with perfect release, each Tranquilize will do 65% debuff accuracy reduction on the opponents, which is quite massive. And you can completely shut down all opponents' debuffs relatively early with Kate, which is very powerful. But again, that would require you to sacrifice a lot of damage initially in the fight. Obviously, once you activate Double Tranquilize, you can shift to Cold Snap and get your damage, ramped up, but it's just going to take longer time. And then we have Caltrops arrow, which is just alternate way of dealing damage. If you go up against somebody that's Cold Snap immune, it's it's better than nothing, but unless opponent has massive energy resistance, you will virtually always prefer Cold Snap over Caltrops. But again, it's still a decent alternate source of damage, I suppose. And Fragility 1, it improves your hit damage, but her hit damage really isn't the greatest, to be honest. And that one, I would say, is borderline useless. I mean, it's nice to have in super long fights. It's better to have it there. But in like 99% of the fights, you will not use Fragility, and you will not often use Caltrops either. It's mainly the Cold Snap and Tranquilize that works. Caltrops just nice to have a little bit of extra damage, kind of like Fragility. Nothing too consequential, to be honest. In my opinion. Maybe I'm wrong. Maybe eventually I'll come to appreciate those arrows, but meanwhile, let's show how she actually works. So here we go. We're gonna be fighting against Winter Soldier first. We're gonna activate the Cold Snap arrow. And as I mentioned, she has her alternate openings, which you can see. On parry, she will evade and passively stun the opponent. Then you can charge your heavy attack for a longer time and you can knock the opponent further down. In most fights, it's just a waste of time. You typically just want to, get to your level 1 as quickly as possible. And now is the key point. Whenever you use your level 1 is going to have 3 hits. You want her to do the first 2 hits at the normal speed and then tap on your block. That will slow down the time and wait till the arrow turns blue. When the arrow is blue, that's when you want to release your finger from the block and you will get your perfect release. It's relatively simple. So let her connect first 2 hits of the level 1, tap on the block then, and then just wait for the tip of the arrow to turn blue. Quite simple. And here you can see that I accidentally switched to Tranquilize arrow, actually. I think that was by mistake here. Slight whoopsie, but it's okay. I'm going to fix that quite quickly. I will try to fix that here. I got Caltrops. There we go. That was my bad. I'm going to slow myself down by a few seconds here. And then do I restart this game? Yes. that was a false start. Okay, let's get back to it. So we saw the start. I get the Cold Snap in. And then basically you just want to get your second Cold Snap in. And as you fight, you want to keep knocking the Winter Soldier down with your heavy attack because that restarts your trick arrow duration and basically refreshes the timers. You can also pause your trick arrows by 5 seconds whenever you punish a heavy attack or a special attack. And if Kate is awakened, you can also pause your trick arrows by hitting the opponent's block. So virtually always you want to punish opponent's special attacks, keep knocking them down with your heavies whilst they are in the corner. Now I activated 2 Cold Snaps. I went for Caltrops. And we can see that he's taking 3,399 per tick. Sweet. Nothing too crazy, nothing too bad. Whenever he's going to dash backwards, or he's going to take that Caltrops damage, which again is, a little bit of extra damage, I suppose. Nice, but, the primary damage is definitely coming from that Cold Snap. So I'm not even going to touch him here at this point. And we finished this fight in 1 minute, 29 seconds, 64 hits. So I ate a combo, then not the biggest of the deals. So it's a relatively good damage output. Definitely above average. Whoops. I think we messed up slightly somewhere. So now, after the Winter Soldier fight, we're going to be going up against Deadpool. And this is, again, shorter duration of a fight, but it is with a class disadvantage, which, again, matters a lot. Class relationships matter a lot for Kate. As I mentioned, any attack modifiers matter a lot. And again, I activated the Cold Snap pre-fight here. You basically just go for your level 1. Again, first 2 hits connect. Tap on the block, release when you see the blue bit there. Now you can see that I deal 1,260, which is significantly less than I was dealing against Winter Soldier. And that is because of the class disadvantage. Go for the second Cold Snap. Sweet, get that perfect release in as well. Now dealing 2,600 per tick. Again, very noticeable difference because of class disadvantage. But still, not too bad. Basically 2 level 1s, and by the time I'm at my 3rd level 1, the fight is kind of over, or could have been over, potentially, if I played it slightly better. And this took 47 seconds. I think then I want to go to the next clip, which I will just be a bit more aggressive here. Still the same thing. Activate the calls in a pre-fight, and we're going to see that even though this Venom the Duck has like 30 some K, 40K more health, I'm actually going to be able to finish this fight quicker. And the reason for it is because there is no class disadvantage. As I mentioned, she's very sensitive to the attack modifiers. Instead of 1200 here, I'm doing 1600, right? And yeah, we're going to definitely see even faster fight than the Deadpool fight, and that is because of the class advantage thing. So I activate my second level 1 here, now dealing considerably more damage, and yeah, the fight is well underway. We're about to finish it off. Very easy, nothing to do, and this fight finished in 41 seconds. So it's very quick for 200k health pool without Liquid Courage Double Edge, no class advantage. It did very, very well. And lastly, to demonstrate the point, coincidentally, because of Alliance where I had to put on Liquid Courage Double Edge, which again is not ideal mastery setup for her survivability, but you guys will see a massive difference in damage. Keep in mind, the previous fight took me like a minute and a half. Right, it was 60 some hits, minute and a half, and now you can see that the cold snap is ticking away for 2,600. And it is a significant difference, and now consider that that is a permanent damage always working there in the background. And now I'm going to activate my second level 1. So 2 level 1s in is basically ticking down for like 5k something. Yeah, it's 5k, 5.4k every tick, 10,000 damage per second. And previously it was like 3,000. And considering that this damage is effectively locked in for the remainder of the fight, there's not much to it. By the time I'm going to activate my third level 1 here, he's basically dead. I don't even really need to activate that third level 1. I will, but I didn't have to for sure. And this one is over in like a minute. I could have done it even faster. And even in short fights, obviously, you will still notice a massive difference. I'm going to do the same fight with Liquid Courage Double Edge against the Deadpool. Just go for 2 level 1s. And this fight's over in 30 seconds with class disadvantage. In cases where you can modify her special attack damage or like boost her up, she actually is legitimately one of the highest damage output champions for like short fights in the game. Now, few matchups, but I could be showing a ton of different matchups. The reality is she can do large variety. She kind of reminds me of Massacre in the sense that, different ways of delivering damage, very solid, fast damage delivery methods. And, here against Kingpin, primarily doing this fight to showcase the fact that, Kingpin's shrugging everything off, but you can still casually knock the Kingpin down because your stuns are passive whenever you evade. Your cold snap is passive, so you don't care about Kingpin purifying it. So using my 4-star rank 3 against 6-star rank 5 Kingpin. Obviously, the recoil is putting in a bit of work here too, but do not underestimate the damage of that cold snap working there in the background and, finishing these fights very, very easily. So she's going to be working against a ton of, different shrug off nodes, shrug off abilities. Be great against skill champions. Also, given the fact that she never really hits hard and her cold snap damage is basically based on that level 1, she is perfectly fine against the Thing. She doesn't have like anything specifically to manage unstoppable or Thing's rock stacks via bleed or something, or ability accuracy reduction, but she's still very kind of easy or relatively easy to use against the Thing. Just use your level 1, all that damage is going to work in the background. Do your best to manage the rock stacks, and everything's fine. Now, a quick note, in these duel fights, I cannot activate the pre-fight, so I'm always or often using less than optimal rotations. Because, ideally I would have wanted just to go for a second cold snap here, but, I didn't manage to shift my arrows in time, and, yeah, ability to activate pre-fights in duels would be awesome, or in these practice matches. So here it's definitely, making the fight longer. If I could have went for 2 cold snaps, the fight would have been over. But, we're still finishing it off. Next up, we have she matches up quite well against most different classes, against Mystic Champions as well, for example. And against Mystic Champions, she has great matchup because she doesn't have any buffs by herself. Only buff that you can trigger is the dexterity. But at the same point, given that you do have that AI manipulation, forcing opponents to throw special attacks in the corner pretty much immediately as soon as they have a chance, kind of like opponent being consistently taunted, relatively easy time to deal with them. And yeah, so Mystic Dispersion isn't a particularly big threat. Eating a level 3 isn't a particularly big threat as well, because opponents most of the time are taunted, and she does well against a whole bunch of different Mystic Champions as well. You just need to keep an eye out for cold snap immunities or large energy resistances. Still though, definitely kind of capable here of dealing with, very powerful defensive Mystic tanks as well. Currently, she's bugged against the Rintra though, so pay attention to that. Rintra fight is definitely bugged. And now another matchup, something like Hulkling. Now this isn't going to be a perfect fight by any means, but again, it would be much quicker and easier if I could activate the Cold Snap pre-fight. But yeah, something against Hulkling, she can avoid most of the block damage because of her evade mechanic into the passive stun, and the fact that you do vast majority of the damage kind of like in the background means that your Cold Snap is continuing to work whilst Hulkling is throwing his special attacks. That Indestructible really doesn't bother you that much as well. You have your Cold Snap paused at all times. So yeah, she does great. Again, if I could activate the pre-fight, this fight would have been much easier, but whatever. As long as I don't lose that 1 Cold Snap, we're fine, which I actually will at this point, so it's just a bit messy. But yeah, she definitely does quite great against Hulkling, because she doesn't have to rely on parry to get her in her heavy attacks, and then obviously Cold Snap is just a perfect way of dealing damage. So Kate will have a ton of potential, which I believe is awesome. And one of the most important things about Kate is that, yeah, she's usable and good in a ton of different matchups. She's kind of like the opposite of Archangel in a sense, where, well, not necessarily the opposite, but we all know with Archangel, if opponents like bleed immune or poison immune or there's something, then he's not going to do well. And there are champions that Archangel absolutely nukes, but there's a ton of champions that Archangel can't do. With Kate, she will nuke vast majority of the champions, and she can still be relatively capable even against these like Cold Snap resistant or energy resistant champions via Caltrops, via Fragility. It is going to be slower, but in general, she covers many, many, many hard opponents, which is one of the reasons what gives her value for questing, for battlegrounds, everywhere in the game. However, yet again, she is a champion that you will need practice. Again, learn that perfect release. For me, the best thing is tap on the block when the second hit of your level 1 connects, release when you see the blue light on the arrow. I'm still kind of learning the level 2 perfect release. I'm not as consistent with that. But yeah, let me know if you have any more questions. But I personally absolutely love Kate. I know several of my teammates do as well. We have a rank 5 Kate in Alliance also. And I'm sure that you guys are going to be seeing a lot of Kate Bishop running around Alliance Wars, Battlegrounds, quests, and a ton of different things. Because she is extremely, well, versatile and capable. Hope this video was useful to you. And if it was, hit that like button, hit that sub button, hit all the good buttons. I'll catch you guys later. Bye. Hello there guys, and welcome back to the channel. So we have all the information about